Hello everyone, my name is Marian Guevara. A huge hello and a huge thank you to anyone who is clicking on this video. Whether you are a new subscriber or an old subscriber, or if you're just visiting, thank you very much. Your viewership is greatly appreciated. So today in this video, I will be recommending to you 4 unique fantasy series. Now, of course, unique is going to be a subjective term, but I will try to explain my qualifiers as to why I consider these 4 series to be unique. Obviously, I haven't read every single fantasy series that is out there, but I like to think that I did make some significant headway in my journey in reading fantasy. One major factor I kept into consideration is the world building. Now, whenever you're reading a fantasy series, you might be able to spot or pinpoint a particular inspiration or culture that has gone on to influence and shape the world, whether that be medieval Europe or Viking Scandinavia, ancient Rome, medieval Japan, ancient China. And it so happens that there are fantastical elements in this world, whether that be magical creatures or perhaps the people practice magic. However, when it comes to these 4 series, it doesn't feel as if there's just one major inspiration that has gone on to influence the world, but rather an amalgamation of various different elements. And then another huge factor that I feel contributes to these books feeling very unique is the genre blending. When you're reading these books, you're often asking, or at least I find myself asking, is this fantasy? Is this sci-fi? Is this steampunk? And the answer is yes, it's all of these things. The authors aren't afraid to kind of blur the boundaries when it comes to genre. It's this world building and genre blending that helps make each of these series feel fresh and exciting. And when you pair this with thrilling storylines, intriguing characters, you have a recipe for a great time and a potential new favorite series. And hopefully, you guys will check out these series and they might end up being favorites of yours. So let's get on with the recommendations. Now, obviously, we're going to start off with the series that I'm pretty sure if you are a regular visitor to this channel, you'll know was already going to be on this list. And that is The Books of Babel by Josiah Bancroft, one of my favorite series of all time. I don't shut up about this series. In fact, it's been 5 videos since the last time I talked about Bancroft or Senlin Ascends and the Books of Babel, so we're fixing that right away. So the first book is Senlin Ascends. The second book, Arm of the Sphinx. The third book, The Hod King. And the fourth and final book, The Fall of Babel. Now, the Books of Babel take place in what I consider to be an alternative Earth in this land called Ur. Now, the crown jewel of Ur is the Tower of Babel, nestled in this expansive desert. And the Tower of Babel is so huge, so tall, it extends all the way up into the heavens. People have no idea how many levels or ringdoms comprise it. And it is considered by, throughout all the land to be the hub of progress, technological advancement, knowledge, culture. And the tower happens to be the favorite subject of one headmaster named Thomas Senlin. So Thomas Senlin is the headmaster of a school in a small fishing village off into the east. And he's always dreamed about going to the Tower of Babel. He constantly, tells his students about the tower despite never being there. He's only ever read about it. And Tom suddenly has a chance to visit this tower. He is recently married, and him and his new wife Maria are off to the Tower of Babel to go there, for their honeymoon. However, before they can even enter it, Tom loses Maria in the crowd. And in order to find her, he must enter the tower, climb its ringdoms, and hope to find her. Now, each level, or ringdom, is basically akin to a kingdom. So, as you can tell from the name, this tower, think of it as a bunch of kingdoms stacked up on top of one another. Each of them will have their own culture, their own set of rules. This also means that the danger is going to manifest itself differently with each ringdom. In some ringdoms, it's going to be a lot more obvious. In other ringdoms, it's going to be more subtle and a lot more hidden. And you're going to have to watch Tom and then this larger cast of characters we're going to come to know navigate through this danger. So what you end up having is one setting, this tower, that is constantly shifting as we're moving from one ringdom to the next. And what this does is that it keeps our characters on their toes, but it also keeps us as the readers on our toes because, like Tom, we have no idea what each new ringdom has in store. Another thing that Bancroft does, and I really appreciate, is that he plays with genre through each book. So what I mean by this is that, for instance, in Senlin Ascends, this one very much has a Alice in Wonderland type of feel. As we're being introduced to the tower through Tom's eyes, we're just moving from one ringdom to another, kind of being exposed to all these weird characters and weird situations. It feels like we're kind of wandering through Wonderland. However, in Arm of the Sphinx, the story adopts more of this like airship pirate swashbuckling adventure, that type of tone, that type of genre, and so on and so forth with the Hod King and the Fall of Babel. Like Bancroft tackles a different sort of tone and genre with each book, and the thing is, he's able to do this without compromising the plot. The way the plot ends in Senlin Ascends, you see how it is able to be picked up in Arm of the Sphinx. The way the story ends in Arm of the Sphinx, you see how it is able to be picked up in the Hod King. Like, it feels like a continuous plot. And on a personal note, what makes this one of my favorite series of all time is that storyline that was introduced to us in Senlin Ascends, where you have this woefully unequipped, average, everyday Joe Schmo who was unwillingly and unexpectedly thrust into the role of the hero. Tom is a well-meaning but ultimately flawed human being, and it was so satisfying watching his journey from book 1 to book 4, seeing the changes he made, the changes he inspired in other people, the sacrifices he made, all for this quest that is motivated by love for his wife. And it's characters like him that I kind of feel naturally endeared to. In fantasy, the assassins and the thieves, they're the ones that kind of have to work hard for my attention. But it's characters like Tom that, as I mentioned, I just feel naturally inclined to. I naturally find myself rooting for. Moving on to the next series, we have The Mirror Visitor Quartet by Christelle Dabos, and this was translated from the original French. So we have the first book, A Winter's Promise, the second book, The Missing of Clairdelune, the third book, The Memory of Babel, and the fourth and final book, The Storm of Echoes. In the world of the Mirror Visitor Quartet, the Earth underwent a great cataclysm that led it to be shattered into these various, floating chunks of landmass called arcs. Now, these arcs are floating in this sea of mist, and the only way you can travel from one arc to another is on an airship. On each arc, they have what is known as a family spirit. They're not necessarily spirits, but rather demigods. And each population on each arc are descendants from that demigod, or this family spirit. Now, the family spirit, each of them have particular powers. So, one great example is the arc of Anima. And the family spirit of that arc is known as Artemis, and she is the mistress of objects. So she has total power, dominion over inanimate objects. And because of this, her descendants have powers that are derived from hers. So everyone in Anima can kind of instill sentient life into an inanimate object, but you also have subsets as well, like readers who can touch an object and then read its past, see the people who came into contact with it, or you have mirror visitors who can travel through mirrors. So you have all these different powers, and you see how they are derived from Artemis. And similar to the ringdoms in the Books of Babel, each arc is going to have its own culture and its own set of rules. So the plot kicks off in A Winter's Promise when our main character Ophelia is unexpectedly betrothed to a man from a completely different arc. Now, intermarriage between arcs is very rare, and she is told by the governing body of her home arc, Anima, that she cannot refuse this marriage because she has already refused several marriages in the past. So this is her last chance. So she has no choice but to leave her home and move to her husband's arc, which is the pole. And it's very different from Anima. The pole has a harsher climate. The people are much harsher. They're a lot more clannish, and they're always at each other's throats. And on top of that, they despise outsiders. And on top of that, they also despise her fiance. So Ophelia is basically dragged into this environment, this very hostile environment, where she is hated as an outsider and for her connection with her fiance. And we find out that perhaps this marriage isn't necessarily purely political, that it might actually have a connection, a tie to something even grander, in the grand scheme of things, something that might have to do with the cataclysm that shattered the earth. Another interesting similarity between the Mirror Visitor Quartet and the Books of Babel is that each installment also plays around with genre. So I would say that A Winter's Promise does feel like political intrigue heavy. And then with the second book, The Missing of Clairdelune, as you can tell from the title, it has a mystery plot line. And then so on and so forth with the Memory of Babel and then Storm of Echoes. It's different. Like you feel like there's a different sort of genre being played with. Now, when it comes to the Mirror Visitor Quartet, obviously it shares many similarities with this series. You know, the unique world building, the genre blending. Another thing I failed to mention is that, you know, all four do touch upon like societal issues, but I think one major element that kind of separates the Mirror Visitor Quartet away from the other three is that it does have a heavy focus on like the philosophical and the metaphysical, especially in that last book, The Storm of Echoes. And I think that contributes to its pretty polarizing reception by many readers. Without giving anything away, there's a lot of discussions that are had about the self, I, and consciousness in The Storm of Echoes, and I haven't seen it explored in such depth in other fantasy books, which once again makes this series just stand out. And the thing is, the Mirror Visitor Quartet is labeled as young adult. However, I feel like that's almost an injustice. Not to say that young adult is bad, but I think it just gets pushed into young adult because Ophelia is a bit younger in age. However, I mean, do we call the Farseer trilogy young adult, even though like when we start off, we follow Fitz as a young boy? Like, no, we don't. And I feel that's a major reason as to why I like to push out and recommend this series, to help convince people, you know, to move beyond the YA premise and to see that there is further depth to be had in this story and further depth to be had with these characters. Moving on to the next series, it's actually a trilogy, and that is the Library Trilogy by Mark Lawrence. So we have the first book, The Book That Wouldn't Burn, the second book, The Book That Broke the World, and the third book, The Book That Held Her Heart. The Book That Wouldn't Burn takes place in a world that on one hand feels very foreign and alien, but then on the other hand feels all too relatable, unfortunately. And we're following two perspectives. One of them is a young girl named Levira, whose life is tragically changed when her village is raided. And she finds herself in this grand city, being employed studying and then eventually being employed to work in this library, this grand library that seemingly contains all the information that can be had in the world. And in this said library, there's also another perspective we follow, a man named Avar, who has grown up his entire life in that library with his adopted siblings. And so we follow each of these perspectives and we see eventually how they interconnect with one another. Out of the four series that I have here, I think the Library Trilogy wins the Uncanny Award. And that's not a mark against the series at all. It's something that I really enjoyed about it. But what I mean by it is that there were elements in this world that felt familiar, that felt relatable. But then at the same time, there were others that also felt like alien, that felt foreign. So I felt suspended in this kind of uncanny valley state when reading this trilogy. And like I said, not a bad thing at all. It really helped with the charm as well of this series, of these characters, of this world. Another thing of note when it comes to this trilogy, when you compare it to the other ones, this one is definitely the most, I would say, fluid. So not only does this trilogy blend genres like fantasy, sci-fi, all that great stuff, this trilogy also plays around with space and time. So when it comes to books 2 and 3, there is like a summary recapping what happens in the previous book. And honestly, I feel like that is necessary because like Lawrence, this world, he plays it like Play-Doh. I can definitely see the potential for sensory overload when it comes to this series. So I definitely feel like these are books that you want to take your time with, that you don't want to rush through so quickly without understanding the world and the mechanisms at play, because these mechanisms will be at play throughout not only just book 1, but book 2 and book 3. Book 1 is very much an establishment installment, so that, you know, once you understand sort of the groundwork, you're better equipped to follow the faster pace of books 2 and 3. You notice how they're quite shorter than book 1. That's because I feel like the pacing of the plot just like kicks into high gear. So yeah, this is definitely a series where you want to pay attention to the details. It is nice that they do have recaps though for books 2 and 3. something of significant note when it comes to the Library Trilogy is obviously the themes, the topics that Lawrence poses to the readers. Now, I feel that the major question of the trilogy is having to do with knowledge. What must be done with knowledge? Obviously, knowledge is a tool that can be used for the betterment of mankind, but it can also lead towards its destruction. And, how many times is mankind going to repeat its mistakes to cause death and destruction before something has to be done? What must be done? Must we destroy all of it to prevent further pain and suffering? Do we leave it as a free-for-all? Or do we instill safeguards? And if so, like how? So these are just big, important questions with regards to knowledge and its importance. And another thing about the Library Trilogy is it's very much an ode to books and to those who love reading. So yeah, this is very much a book lovers, a bibliophiles type of series. And you can see the love and appreciation for the written word. Now, for the last series I have to show you, this is the only unfinished series on this list, and that is the Shadow of the Leviathan series, the Anna and Din Mysteries. I'm not entirely sure what the name of it is, but it is The Tainted Cup and A Drop of Corruption. I loved both of these books. In fact, A Drop of Corruption is one of my favorite books of this year so far. Just fantastic. I finished it, and as soon as I finished it, I wanted book 3. Like, that's how much I really enjoy this series so far. It is shaping up to be a favorite. So this is a fantasy mystery series. It was marketed as like a fantasy Sherlock Holmes and Watson, and it takes place in a very, very fascinating world. The Shadow of the Leviathan series takes place in what is known as the Great and Holy Empire of Kanem. Now, off to the east, near the coast, out of the waters rise what is known as Leviathans, these huge beasts that threaten to encroach upon the land and destroy everything in its path. And every year people are desperate to move away from the coast and move further inland, further into the heart of the empire to get away from these Leviathans that just don't seem to be leaving anytime soon. So this is a very interesting world because, yes, we do have these creatures that almost, they remind me of like the kaiju from Pacific Rim, but then you have a lot of sci-fi elements because, biological, biochemical advancements is something that's very major to the series, especially when it comes to genetic tampering or genetic enhancements. So one of our main characters is Din, and he is an assistant to this investigator named Anna. And Din is, similar to many others in this world of the Empire, he has been genetically enhanced for a particular job. So he is able to have perfect memory, to have perfect recall. Instead of like writing down notes or anything like that, he's just able to memorize it. And how he does it is that he takes a scent and then he sniffs it, and then he like kind of looks around, scans everything. And the thing is that memory is stored and it's tied to that scent. So anytime he wants to perfectly remember what he saw or heard, all he has to do is just smell that scent again. So it's very interesting, and you have other people in the Empire who have different types of genetic enhancements, and they all serve some sort of purpose for the Empire. Din is very much the Watson to Anna's Sherlock. Din, very reliable, resourceful at times, and then Anna, who is very eccentric and who is very unorthodox, but she gets the job done. And throughout the series, Anna and Din are called to different parts of the Empire to solve cases that seemingly no one else can solve. Now, what I really love, what I really appreciate about this series, about these books, is the balancing act that Robert Jackson Bennett is able to pull off. As I mentioned, these books are like, they're fantasy, they're sci-fi, they're mystery, and it doesn't feel like any of these elements overshadow one another. I also love the way that Bennett is able to deliver, backstory or lore. It never feels like it's interfering with the mystery. If Bennett wants to share something about Din's past, if he wants to share something, if he wants to share a hint about Anna's past, if he wants to share something about, the role of the Empire and its relation to the Leviathans, it's delivered in such a way that feels organic. You don't feel as if the mystery plotline is put on pause for him to info dump. It just feels that Bennett did everything right. I feel invested in the characters. I feel invested in the mystery. You know, I felt creeped out in parts of the story where I was meant to feel creeped out. So I don't have a lot to say because this is like an unfinished series. But as I mentioned beforehand, this is shaping up to be a favorite series of mine. Both of these were 5 stars for me. I look forward to the 3rd book because I know I'm not only going to be getting a very enthralling mystery, I know I'm going to get more information about this world and how our characters are going to be dealing with it. So yeah, looking forward to book 3 in the future. So those are the 4 unique fantasy series I had to recommend to you. Please let me know down in the comments if you've read any of them, if you are now intrigued to try them out. And hey, if you do read them, please come back here. Let me know down in the comments. What did you think? Did you enjoy them? Were they for you? What other, fantasy series do you think are underrated or are unique? Please let me know. I do love getting recommendations in the comments. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I hope I coherently explained my reasoning behind why I think that these series are worth your time and are pretty unique when it comes to the fantasy genre. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!